If you're looking to create awesome photos from ACC, you're in the right place. Now, I did make a tutorial approximately 2 years ago showing you how to do this. However, this is an updated version, as 2 years down the line, I now know a hell of a lot more than I did back then about really taking awesome photos. Now, regardless of whether you're a complete beginner or you're someone who knows how to use Photoshop, you'll find both ways how to do it in this guide. So follow along with me. There's a couple of things we need to go through before we actually get out on track and look at taking photos, and we're going to be covering 2 different styles to take photos, and then also later we're going to be jumping into Lightroom and Photoshop and really making the photo come to life. So first things first, we're going to start off in the menu of Assetto Corsa Competizione, and here we're going to go to the options. Now, in the video settings here, depending on the power of your PC, you may not want to have all of these up in the epic settings. However, of course, it's going to increase the fidelity and detail of the photos the higher the settings you can add. So looking at the resolution, of course, you want this set to the resolution of your screen, this being 2560 on my monitor. Now, I am limited to 60 frames a second on this specific PC monitor, so I have this also set to 60. Resolution scale. Now, some people will tell you to increase this to increase the fidelity and quality of the photo that you're going to take. But however, what I find is that the effect on frame rate just is not worth it whatsoever. So I suggest leaving this at 100 unless your PC is an absolute beast. So going down to the rest of the settings, of course, you want to make sure that all of these are set to the highest settings possible. So view distance is going to be epic. So our shadows, of course, are very important. And the contact shadows, of course, we want enabled also. So coming down to effects, processing, foliage, textures, etc. If possible, we want all of these to be the highest setting possible, which is going to be epic. Now, unless you're taking an onboard shot, you may not need to worry about mirror view distance, so I wouldn't worry about that for replays or for taking photos. Coming down then to advanced, the materials quality, of course, is epic also. And then when it comes to volumetric fog and bloom quality, etc., if you're planning on taking sunrise, sunset shots, you may want the bloom quality up to epic also. And then the image customization, motion blur, I prefer to leave off. We can always add blur in post-processing in the likes of Photoshop, so I leave that off to make sure all of my lines are super clean. And then going down here, the sharpness at 80%, and then you've got dirt effects, image contrast, exposure gains, etc. All of these can be also edited post-processing in the likes of Canva or Photoshop or Lightroom, so I wouldn't really worry about this now. But if you are just looking to take photos in ACC and maybe not do anything with them past that point, maybe have a play around with these settings. It's all about personal preference at this stage. Before I forget also, there's 2 other settings you want to make sure are set to epic. If you go into options, there's also 2 replay options in general. Make sure that your replay quality is set to epic, and of course, VAR AI replay quality is set to epic also for best results. So once you've made all those changes and you've applied as many of the high settings as possible, go ahead, click on apply, and then it's time to get out on track. So for the purpose of this video, I'm going to be going through some of my old replays in this gallery, so we're going to try find an interesting one here. So let's go with this BMW M4 GT3 at the Nürburgring. This was an event we did approximately a year ago now, I think, but let's have a look and see if we can get some good photos from this. So we're going to be going across 2 different styles. One's going to be static and a little bit more dynamic then for the second one. The latter being easier because we're following the car around. So we're going to focus on that one first before we go to some form of static shot. So first things first, I'm basically going to scan through the replay and see if there's any opportunities to take a good photo basically. So if I'm battling with a car or there's a specific section of the track I think is quite cool, we're going to be looking for that shot. So let's just focus here on this turn on the Nürburgring. So I want to get these 2 BMWs in focus. Now, to access the camera settings, what I'm going to do is first click on F7 on the keyboard, and that'll bring us inside the car. Now, this is the first step we have to do to access the camera HUD settings. So what we can do here is control the camera with our mouse. So all you have to do is press down your mouse key and hold, and then move the camera as and where you please. Now, this is extremely intuitive and user-friendly, I find. And of course, if we want to move back or forward, back, left or right, we use the arrow keys on the keypad as well. Now, if you're moving about and you want to speed up, what we can do is use the mouse scroll key and scroll forward, it speed it up, or we can scroll backwards ultimately to slow it down. So as I said, extremely user-friendly and intuitive to use. So now what we want to do is get our basic angle here. And of course, we need to remember that we're going to be following the car here. So I'm going to press the scroll key, and now the Cinema HUD will open up. Now in the controls tab here, you'll see follow car is enabled. Of course, if we're doing this type of shot, you want to make sure, but by default, this is usually enabled. So it should be the case by default. Now we can change our field of view here. Of course, we can come in closer or further away on the car. Let's leave that at 90 degrees for now. We're going to go into the depth of field settings here, and this is going to have you playing around with stuff like aperture or blur, background blurs, etc. So it gets a little bit more complicated from here, but I'll try to explain it as we walk through. So we're going to enable depth effect, and you can see immediately now that everything comes out of focus. So we're going to start from the bottom up, or almost the bottom up. Blade count, we don't really need to worry about. The blade count is basically going to be how many edges these little out of focus circles have, basically. So it's that minute detail. You'll see as I bring the slider down, it moves more into a square and then goes more hexagonal as I increase the blade count. So probably keeping them around 7, but again, that's such a minor detail, you may not need to worry about that. Focus distance, I'm going to select near because the car is right up on the camera. So what I can do is change this now, and you'll see as I bring it up, so I want to use this arrow key rather than sliding, about 0.5, no, a little bit more, let's go up towards 0.12 of a meter is where we begin to see the front car come into focus. And of course I can always come in a little bit further or move further away depending on. Just bear in mind that every time you move the camera, you may need to edit the aperture and focus distance and focal length again. So focal length will basically allow you to zoom in on the car. And as I said previously, the more you zoom in or the more you change the camera, you're going to have to come back then and edit the focus distance. So let's try edit the focus distance out to about there. Now you can see there's a tiny little bit of a blur on the background car and background, and then our front car is in focus, which is exactly what we want here. If we were to play around with the aperture, then we can of course finesse that. So the background car is a little bit more out of focus now, and then I can change my focus distance to bring that front car back into focus. So now let's play it from here. So what I'm going to do is press the scroll key again to get rid of the camera HUD. I don't want to move my mouse too much past this point because the camera is attached to the mouse still. So what I need to do is click the mouse to lock that camera position in, and then I can simply press play and the replay will then play. So going back, let's press play. I'm going to move my mouse to the side so that the replay HUD disappears, and then I'm going to keep my finger on F12, which is the screenshot key. And anytime I want to take a photo now, I'm just going to press F12 and that'll take a screenshot that will save automatically in my Steam installation. So let's keep it on this angle for a little bit more. We'll try to get 1 or 2 more shots here as we come through the Schumacher S's. So quite cool action shots there, and of course we'll have that motion in the background as well because the cars are moving as we're taking the shots. So let's pause this, and now let's look for another angle that we may want to use. So bearing in mind again that the camera is going to be following the car, so we don't want it too far away. We're not going to play around with the aperture or focus too much more. So I want to keep it relatively the same distance to the car. So let's come back here onto this lap. Maybe let's start around here, and we're going to move the mouse key off again. I'm going to keep my finger on F12 once that replay HUD disappears. Now anytime I want to take a picture again, I'm simply pressing F12 whenever I think there's a cool opportunity for a shot there, especially when that beamer behind is nice and close, maybe getting that sun in the background also. And we'll get another few shots here as we come through the Schumacher S's. And then I did see one with the stadium in the background, the Mercedes grandstand, so we'll try get that now. There we are. So that's going to be a good shot. So now before we move on into a more static style shot, let's have a look at the photos that we've taken so far. So if you go into your Steam installation, you'll see more often than not that the most recent screenshots will show up on your main page for the game. If you can't access it here, go to view and then just click on screenshots down the bottom of the menu, and then you'll be able to access them from there. But looking at the photos here, I think this one's super cool. Car is nice and close behind, got a little bit of blur in the background, and then of course the Mercedes grandstand behind. And then looking at the other ones, I think this particular one is quite cool, coming through the Schumacher S's, same with this. So we've got a couple here that we can work with. This is also a good one. So yeah, we've definitely got enough to work with here. We've got a few solid screenshots that of course you can use as is, or you can pull into Photoshop Lightroom, as we'll be taking a look at later on in this video. So if you simply want to be taking these screenshots like this, bringing them in and edit them in Photoshop or Lightroom, you can skip to that part of the video. It's linked just beneath in the description. However, if you want to learn how to take static shots, stick with me for now as I take you through that process. So let's now have a look at a static shot, aka us sitting on the side of the track or somewhere on the track, simply waiting for the cars to pass rather than being attached to any specific car. Now, in my experience, this provides a better photo, and it just turns out better all the time because of the different ways in which you can position yourself on the track side, basically like you're a photographer on the side of the track. So I've already opened up a replay here. I'm in the Mercedes-AMG GT3 at Laguna Seca, and of course the corkscrew always being that place where you want to be able to photograph the cars coming through, as you've got multiple angles and shots to be able to take. So where we need to start again is pressing F7 on the keypad to bring yourself into the cockpit of your car or your target car in which you want to photograph. But of course, it's not as important at this point that you target a car, because you're simply going to be static on the track. You can photograph any and all cars as they come into shot. So what we need to do here now, before we go and position our cameras and get everything going there, we need to access our Cinema HUD, because we need to go to controls and ensure that follow car is disabled, because we don't want to go and set up our camera angles only to realize that follow car is still enabled. Once we disable it, we'll lose all of those camera settings. So let's come down to the bottom of the corkscrew here, and we're going to position ourselves down here somewhere where we can basically see the cars come over the crest of the hill, and maybe even capture one or two of the cars following them through. So you can even see already it's quite a cool angle to grab here. Let's come up closer to the corner, maybe a little bit higher up. So we'll just have a general play around here. Don't really know what that Ferrari is doing here. I think these two boys had contact, but we won't worry about them. They'll be coming past us, so the photo opportunity will be after that point in time. So let's start at about a 45-degree angle is generally an okay place to start. Let's actually bring this replay forward or back, wherever we have the most cars coming through here. So now we have this is a good angle to get the Aston Martin here with the Porsche behind also. So something like this is quite a good place to start. So let's go to depth of field. We're going to enable it, and then we're going to work on our focal length. So we're going to bring this in. So we have the car in the forefront, and then of course we have this Porsche coming up over the hill that we want slightly out of focus in behind. So for this, we're going to change our focus distance to far, and we're going to play around with the focus distance here. And now you can see that now we have the front car in focus on the front, and this Porsche coming up over the crest of the hill is out of focus behind. So let's have a play around here just to finesse and get those final edits made just before we're thinking about making any sort of photos here. So let's maybe see if the blade counts makes any difference. Not really, not visually at least. So we're not going to worry too much about that. We'll play around with the aperture here to make sure that our car is in focus, and of course that Porsche up behind is not. So careful not to move the mouse too far here, because of course I want these cars in focus. I might actually change the angle of it ever so slightly. I'm going to reduce the speed of the camera because I don't want that to change too much. I want to get a little bit more of the side of the Bentley here. You can even see now we have the track coming up on the bottom of the camera here. So let's have a play with this. I'm going to lock that camera in position. We're going to come back about 16 seconds. You can see here now there's going to be multiple shots that we're going to be able to take. So we'll come back another 8. I'm going to press play, have my finger on F12 ready to go, move my cursor off the screen so that replay HUD disappears. And now we begin to click as those cars come through. There's our crash. Okay, so I think we could end up with some pretty cool photos from that. So always a super awesome place to be able to take photos there as cars come up over the hill, especially when they have the lights on, or maybe it's a sunrise, sunset. But let's quickly jump into Steam. We're going to have a look at those photos now before we move forward and see if there's any that we can already select. If not, we're going to jump back in and try take a few more. So again, in Steam, we're going to go to View and Screenshots. This one's a good one with the Lambo in front of the Audi. And then because we're so fast, just being able to constantly click F12, you can see here now that it does present quite a few good photo opportunities. So this one especially being super, super cool, I think. And there we have our Bentley, or sorry, our Aston Martin as well. This one's a good one with the Lambo on its own also, the Merc coming over. So we've got a few really, really good shots here. Right, now we have our 2 images ready to go. So where we're going to be going from here, we're going to focus on the left-hand side image first. We're going to be adding this to Photoshop and editing it, adding motion blur in behind. So this is going to be the focus image for the Photoshop section of this tutorial. And then we'll bring both images into Lightroom later to really play around with the colors and the filters over the images. So let's hop into Photoshop right now and add some motion blur. So now we have our first image opened in Photoshop ready to edit. So for this image, I'm going to add motion blur to the background. So we need two different layers on this. We need to isolate the cars from the background and then add a motion blur to the background. And this will give the sense of speed that we're looking for when this photograph was taken, because albeit the cars are moving and the tires are moving, obviously you can see some motion there. The background is very static. So we want to make this photo pop. So to do this, we're going to be using something called a lasso tool. It's not complicated to use. It just takes a few minutes of your time. So if you really want your images to pop, this is seriously the way to go about it and adding motion blur into it. So on our single layer here, we simply have the image open in Photoshop as is. I'm going to go to my menu bar here on the left-hand side and open up the polygonal lasso tool. Now I'm going to zoom in as much as I need to see the detail on the car. And then you can start anywhere, and I just want to generally follow the basic outline of the car. You don't need to be super accurate here. Try obviously get as close as you can to get the lines as clean as possible. However, if you're a millimeter, 2 millimeters off, it really doesn't matter. The way this image or final image is going to be layered at the end of it will make sure any of those mistakes are well hidden. But we'll cover that when we get to that point. Now there's no real complication here. All you need to do is do exactly as I am, which is simply going around the car, taking the time to be as clean and tidy as you possibly can, and take the few minutes to cut out the general shape of the car following the shapes around. So I'll speed up this portion of the video and I'll come back to normal speed when we need to discuss the next steps of adding or subtracting from our selections. So I'll see you there in a few seconds. Alright, so now we have the basic outline of the car done. At this point now we want to look and pay attention to where inside of our current selection we also need to cut out. Because as we're going to be adding motion blur to the background, what we don't want is all this background outside of the car to have motion blur on. And you see the likes of this triangle on the inside here. We need to ensure that the motion blur applies to this also. So what we need to do at this point is detract or subtract from our current selection. How we're going to do that is keep the polygonal lasso tool selected. We're going to hold down Alt and then make a new selection. So once you've made that new selection, you can let go of Alt and we can go ahead and outline the selection as we've done before. And then once that selection has been made, you'll see here now that it shows as part of this selection, and this is now going to be cut out alongside that. We also have a shape here in underneath the spoiler. So you hold down Alt again to make sure you're subtracting from the existing selection. And then we want to have a look inside the car here and make sure that there's no areas in which we want to get rid of also. So maybe these windows, these basic shapes, I'm going to hold down Alt because I want to subtract this from the existing selection. Put out this window on the inside. And there's also a bit of a window here as well that we best get rid of also. Towards the back of the car here, if I was to be really particular about it, there's going to be a shape here beyond the helmet where you can see out the back window. Same here. And then I think apart from that, we're generally safe when it comes to what we can see out the back of the car there. So now we also want to isolate the second BMW. So now we need to add this to our existing selection rather than subtract away from it. To do this, we're going to hold down Shift and then select this. And now we're adding this selection to our current selection. So when we go to isolate one card, the both of them will obviously isolate together, which is exactly what we need. So again, I'm going to be taking a few seconds here to just generally go around the shape of this car, trying to be as careful as possible to get all of the details in here at the bottom of the car there where there's no detail really, it's all just shadows. I can obviously just create a straight line as that's going to be not noticeable whatsoever when we actually get to the final photo. The more intricate bits, of course, you can see here now I'm so zoomed in on the photo, it gets quite pixelated. But of course, we still can see the general outline of the spoiler here on the car. It doesn't have to be exactly precise. Of course, I want to make sure to knock out as much background in there as possible. So now we have the basic selection made on the BMW behind. Same thing as before. We now want to go and have a quick look to see if there's any additions or subtractions to that selection that we need to make sure that the motion blur looks authentic when we actually add it. So I can see here again, we have that shape on the spoiler and we have that triangle in between the spoiler and the car shape as well. I want to make sure to hold down Alt, make that selection, go ahead, finish off that shape. That'll subtract. And then also here underneath that spoiler, that little circle or semicircle that we have here. When it comes to the inside or windows, I really don't think there's anything there. I think this triangle could be gone. So let's just subtract this. Okay, so that's all of our selections made. We now have both BMWs not yet isolated, but we have them all selected and all of the areas where we need to cut out selected also. So at this point, when that's selected and you can see them all there, I'm going to press copy, paste, and now we have an isolated layer ahead. If I get rid of the background, you can now see we have the two cars completely isolated on top of the original image. So at this point now we want to do something called inverting the selection. So basically I want a brand new layer in this image that has the car removed, but all of the background in, because currently we have an isolated layer with the cars, and then we have the original layer with the background and the cars. So we want a layer in between these. So what I'm going to do is hold down Control and select layer 2 here, which is going to be the cars layer. You can see here now that selection comes back in where that dotted line shows again. I'm then going to press Control-Shift-I, and this is the command to invert. I'm going to select my first layer here, then press Control-C and paste. Now you'll see we have a brand new layer in place where those cars are now cut out of the original background image. Now we can apply the motion blur to this specific layer. So we don't want to apply it to the background layer. We want to just have the motion blur on this middle layer. And I'm going to show you exactly why once we've made these changes. So let's rename our layers actually, just so we can organize these. So I have the original, I have the motion layer, and then let's have this isolated cars, just so we have our art file nice and clean. So I'm going to make sure the motion layer is selected. What we're going to do is come up to filter, and I want to go to blur and then motion blur. Now you can see immediately that the layer blurs. So you want to be careful about the angle here. Of course, you don't want an 80 or 90 degree angle where the motion's coming up and down when the cars are moving a specific direction. So in this instance, I'm basically going to follow wherever the cars are going. So as they're coming through the Schumacher S's here towards the camera, maybe an angle of about 9 degrees. And the distance in the blur, obviously you can get super extreme here where you can see the photo begins to get really blurred, but it's not really worth it doing that because we're obviously isolating this layer on top of the original image. We can't go too extreme with the blur because we need to add the original image back in to fill any sort of discrepancies there is around the isolated cars, and I'll show you what I mean by that in just a moment. So we'll increase this blur to maybe about 78 pixels. I think that looks absolutely fine. Now when I add in the isolated cars layer, you can see here that we have this surrounding the cars. And this is where we've obviously blurred the background beneath this, or the layer beneath this, and this has kind of stretched the image. So now we're left with this empty space around the cars. What we can do then is bring back in the original image, and now you can see that fills in the space in between. So if I remove it, you can see the background there, or the PNG effect, and then bringing that back in just removes that yet again. So now you can see the difference here between this and the original image. If I group these top two layers and get rid of them, and now look at this image compared to this, and that motion blur really brings this image to life. So what I'm going to do at this point, and especially if you're making these for YouTube thumbnails, I'm going to go ahead and create a new image. So let's have it at 1280 by 720 for a YouTube thumbnail. And then let's just name this image 1, and we'll go to create. Now what I'm going to do is bring all of these layers. I'm going to have Control-C, Control-V in here. I'm going to press Control-T to grab all of the layers. I'm going to resize them. And now I can kind of reframe it into the new picture size. So even if I want to angle it slightly and bring the cars a little bit closer than they were originally, I think that'll really make the image come to life. We can press done then once you're happy where the image is at and where the cars are placed within the image. And then we'll go to File, Export, and we'll save for web at this point. We're going to make sure it's set to JPEG high. We're going to keep the dimensions 1280 by 720. Of course, if you're not using this for YouTube and you want a super high res image, probably best to create a new canvas size a lot bigger than the likes of 1280 in width. We're going to go ahead and save this. We'll save it into our downloads folder. And now we're going to go ahead into Lightroom and edit this. And then whilst we're in a Lightroom, we're also going to edit the other static photo that we took at Laguna Seca. So here in Lightroom, what we can do with two options, basically, we can use a preset, or we can go ahead and play around with all of the different variables and channels available to edit on the right-hand side. So let's have a look at some of the basic filters in which are available within Lightroom. So if I go over here to these two circle icons and bring this out, you can see here with tons of options. So this will basically pre-apply a preset on top of it. And something like this isn't actually too bad. So you can basically apply the preset and then go ahead and refine the exposure, the blacks, whites, etc. that you want to on the right hand side here throughout all the controls. Something like this is quite a realistic looking tone as well. Actually, it looks more like a real photo there now than it did in the original shot. You can also go black and white, a little bit more contrast heavy here. But really, all of the presets provide any and all types of filters, colors, and all that. But what we'll do for this one is we'll go ahead with the original image. We won't apply any sort of preset. We'll go ahead and manually edit the original photo to see what we can come up with ourselves. So looking at the exposure here first, obviously we can bring this down ever so slightly. The contrast, maybe just a little tweak in the positive direction. Highlights, now what I want to do, or what I like to do, if I'm unfamiliar with the control itself, slide it from left to right as far as it'll go, and you'll quickly see that the effect that it has on the image itself. So let's leave the highlights around there. Usually before I look at the light, I like to come down to the curve settings here and adjust as I see fit. So constantly having a look at the image as we do so, make sure there's not too many highs or lows or high contrast, anything like that. And then I can come back here to the sliders and make some small adjustments. Now, if at any point you want to compare the original photo against the changes that you're making, you can come down here to this icon, then you can show the original versus the changes that you're making real time in Lightroom. So we want to increase the temperature, maybe have it a little bit more yellow or iRacing style. And then of course we have textures, which will increase the fidelity of it, clarity, which will make it more blurry. Dehaze is a good one. Kind of darkens the image without losing any sort of quality. We can of course add some sort of vignette onto here, so we can have around the edges quite a lot darker. And that's basically all the changes that I usually make to these images. Of course, if you really want to put the time into it, you can spend any amount of time in Lightroom making these edits. But more often than not, I'll simply come in, have a look at the pre-existing presets on offer, and then simply adjust from there. So as I said, there's some of these that are super cool. So this one in particular, I think looks great. And yeah, nice and easy to apply. So now let's look at the image that we also had from Laguna Seca. And now let's go ahead and quickly add a preset onto here. So of course, if I wanted to make it look a little bit more realistic, actually this one looks great. It makes it look a lot darker, a lot further on into the night, but actually I really, really like this. So regardless of the other ones that we see here, this one's quite realistic. I think I'll actually go back and choose that one that was up above there. I really, really like the style of that. But as I said, there's tons of presets here available for you. And of course, when you select a preset, all of those options will have changed on the right-hand side where you can make those final adjustments yourself. So there you have it. A couple of ways to create awesome photos from Assetto Corsa Competizione. Really hope you enjoyed the video and got some value from it. Of course, if you did, let me know down below by hitting that like button and leaving a comment. And if you want to keep watching more of my videos, I suggest this one right here. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.